Hello everyone, and welcome back to Classic Gamer 74. I am your host, Anthony Gamer, and today we're going to be discussing prototypes for the Colecovision. And with that said, the arcade is now open. When the video game crash of 1983 and 84 happened, all of the game systems of the time suffered greatly because of that. I always say that the Atari 2600 suffered the most, and that is because I believe that a lot of great games that were supposed to be made for the Atari 2600 didn't get released. However, one could argue that ColecoVision actually suffered the most. And why is that? Well, that's because Coleco ended up going out of business a couple years after the crash. Coleco had a lot of great ideas that never came to fruition because of the video game crash itself. So today we're going to look at some of those games that they had planned that unfortunately ended up getting canceled, whether they never got off the starting block or if they were ready to hit the shelves before they ultimately got canceled. Keep in mind, we're going to talk about games that prototype ROMs actually exist for. Now, some of these games would later go on to be made by homebrew programmers, but there were some that never did. So, without further ado, let's get into the games. And our first game is the Berenstain Bears. Now, many of you that are classic gaming enthusiasts are probably familiar with the KidVid game system that was the add-on for the Atari 2600. With that add-on, it would run through a cassette, then through a cartridge, and into the 2600. And they made two really cool learning games, edutainment games, one with the Smurfs, the other with the Berenstain Bears. And Coleco was very proud of it, as they should have. It was a great technological breakthrough for its time. What you're looking at here is that Berenstain Bears game for the KidVid. I'll go into those in a little more detail in a later episode. But ultimately, Coleco had plans to make a version of the game for their own system, the ColecoVision. Unfortunately, the KidVid was not a success, through no fault of their own, honestly, I think. And all we have is this demo screen of what would have been the Berenstain Bears KidVid game for the ColecoVision. I'd like to see what it would have been like if it had been finished. What do you guys think? Let me know in the comments section below. I'd love to hear what you think about this whole project. And next up, we have Adventures of the Pink Panther. Now, we have gone into detail in other videos about the whole pursuit of the Pink Panther story, so I won't go into that in a lot of detail. What you're looking at here is the original demo that was created to advertise the game. Now, the ROM for the 2600, of course, has been found, dumped, and is readily available. However, the actual ROM for this and for the Magnavox Odyssey 2 and for the Atari 8 haven't surfaced, or if they have, they are held in the hands of collectors. According to rumors, a few years ago, some ColecoVision homebrew programmers made a version of this based on this demo, but it has yet to see the light of day. Hopefully someday it will. And next up, we have Dragon's Lair. There's a reason why this game is the second most ported game in gaming history, because it's a lot of fun, and the graphics are stunning. Well, in most of the ports. The original, of course, was great. What you're looking at here is the Atom Computer version of the game. They were planning on making a version for the ColecoVision, and it didn't get released. I believe it was fixed and released later. However, all the ROMs I found wouldn't work. So I believe it probably looked quite a bit like this one here. Honestly, this is probably one of the better ports I've seen. I'm not very good at it, as you can see. I was at the arcade one, but overall, this one is a very nice port of that game. Much better than some that came out during the 8-bit years, in my opinion. I honestly have to say it was a travesty this game wasn't released, and this is Video Hustler. All the other game systems from that time had a pool game. Atari had Trick Shot, the Magnavox Odyssey 2 had one, and then, of course, years later, Intellivision had, which was probably the best of all pool games. But this one was pretty cool, and it was based on an arcade game. It's your standard 6-ball game. The graphics are good. Aiming is wonderful. I mean, it's a great pool game, and it's just a shame that it wasn't released because honestly, this is one I think that would have been a big seller. I believe it was repackaged and released later on, but it's just a shame that back in the day it wasn't available because honestly, the game is a whole lot of fun. Next up, we have Fall Guy. Now, Fall Guy was a TV show on ABC starring Lee Majors. Many of you remember him as the $6 Million Man. He was a stuntman by day and a PI at night. So, to capitalize on this success of this show, 20th Century Fox decided to make a video game. However, the video game itself wasn't released. There's two parts to it. One where you're driving around, and the other where you're in a warehouse. Unfortunately, I didn't make it to the warehouse scene because I'm really not that good at driving games. It's a shame it wasn't released as it was a pretty popular show back in the day. And the game is pretty fun. One of these days I'm going to get past this first screen, I promise. And while we're on the subject of TV shows, we have MASH. This also was going to be released by 20th Century Fox. Now, many of you probably know that there was an Atari 2600 game of MASH that was a big success, just like the TV show, which was based on a very successful movie. The show was so successful, in fact, it ran for several seasons. It had a spin-off series, books, t-shirts, pretty much you name it. People were mad about MASH. Unfortunately, this Colecovision game didn't quite get released, although it appears to be fully finished. It's very similar to the 2600 version of the game. It's got a couple different levels and difficulty. It's really a cool game, and it is just a shame that it wasn't released back in the day. And now we go to a movie tie-in, and that was Porky's, and another game by 20th Century Fox. Many of you are familiar with the film Porky's. It's a coming-of-age movie set in the 1950s, and a game was made for the 2600, which was quite popular. At least everybody I knew had it. It was a fun game. It wasn't perfect, but it was still a pretty cool game back in the day. And because of the success of that, 20th Century Fox planned to release a version for the ColecoVision. However, it was canceled. Now, years later, the game was put on a cart and made available as a homebrew game and is actually quite valuable. The game itself has 3 distinct screens and has a lot of replayability. Honestly, it's a great game based on a great movie. And our final game for 20th Century Fox is The Yolks on You. I don't know what to say about this one. I think it was going to be an edutainment game, but pretty much as soon as the game starts, it freezes. I've tried multiple versions of it and couldn't get it to work. If any of you know any more about this game, please let me know in the comment section below, or if you have a ROM that goes further or anything you have on it, please let me know. And next up we have Starfire. Now this was an arcade game that was going to be released back in 1983. The arcade game was released in 1979, and when they created it, they'd hoped that maybe they could make it into a Star Wars game, as they were hoping to get the license for that, but it didn't quite pan out. Overall, what you have is a cool space shooter game. The game itself would actually get released on cart in 2021 by a homebrew programmer, and that's what you're looking at right here. Now, the next series of games, and the last, are games that were made by Atari Soft. Now, for those of you that don't know, Atari Soft was the branch of Atari that made Atari licensed games for other game consoles. And the first one we have is Dig Dug. Now, this is one of my all-time favorite arcade games. I just really love this game, mostly because it was one of the very first games I ever got my initials on the #1 spot in the arcade. But besides that, you are this cute little guy, and you're going around trying to stop these bad guys and pumping them full of air or dropping rocks on them. It's a fun game and just one of those arcade classics, and it's just a shame that back in the day, those that had the ColecoVision didn't get a chance to play it. And next we have Joust. Now, in this game, you take on the role of a knight riding on an ostrich, and you are jousting and trying to destroy the evil knights and this pterodactyl. And just trying to basically survive. It's a really fun platformer game, and one thing I have to say I love about this game is it doesn't matter what game system you play it on, it's universally the same and a great game. I don't know about you guys, but it's almost unthinkable to have a vintage game system without Moon Patrol. But yet, back in the first run of the Colecovision, there wasn't one, but there were plans for it. Many of you are familiar with the game Moon Patrol. This side-scrolling space shooter game was a whole lot of fun. Simplistic, but yet just hours and hours of fun. Years later, of course, it would get released on cart as a homebrew, and it does fetch quite a bit of money these days. But what else can you say about Moon Patrol? Just an arcade classic through and through. Speaking of games that is really hard to imagine it not being on a vintage or just about any game console, and that's Pac-Man. What can you say? What more can we say about this game? It was a really fun maze game. It's in legendary status, considered one of the greatest video games of all time, but sadly enough, back in the day, ColecoVision didn't have it. Of course, years later, it was carted and was released, but back in the day, if you had a ColecoVision and that's all you had, and you were looking forward to getting to play Pac-Man, yeah, it didn't happen. Not only did they not get Pac-Man, but they also didn't get Miss Pac-Man. And actually, it wouldn't be for many years later that Miss Pac-Man would be available for the ColecoVision. Actually, it was released on a compilation that I recently acquired that has Pac-Man and Miss Pac-Man on the same cart. It is a shame that these two classic maze games weren't released for the ColecoVision back in the day. But again, we can only speculate what the video game world would have been like had there not been the video game crash. Well, these are all the prototypes I have for today. Did I forget any? Did I miss any? Let me know in the comments section below, and maybe I'll do a follow-up video. In our next episode, we're going to discuss the Kid Vid, talking video games. Well, that concludes this episode of Classic Gamer 74. I really hope you all enjoyed it. If you did, let me know by smashing that like button, subscribe if you haven't already, and don't forget to click that little bell icon down there so you'll be notified when I upload new episodes. Don't forget to check out my new book, The History of Gaming, according to a middle-aged guy who likes old video games and plays with puppets. It's available on Amazon in both print and ebook. Also, check out my Patreon page. You'll find the link in the description below. I got some cool stuff on there, some videos that you won't find anywhere else, including some behind-the-scenes stuff and some music videos. So please check me out and help me out on Patreon. It'd be most appreciated. Well, until next time, this has been Anthony Gamer. Thank you for stopping by. I really appreciate it. Until next time, be strong, be safe, be happy, be healthy, and above all, take care of each other, be kind to each other, and stop hate of all kinds. Until next time, the arcade is closed. See you guys soon. Bye.